everyone. I am Nicole Mamogay. I'm from BSED 4th year and today I will be discussing about the story entitled The Day the Dancers Came by Bienvenido and Santos. But before that, let's have a short glimpse or let's have get to know or let's know who is Bienvenido and Santos. So Bienvenido Noki Santos was born in Tondo, Manila. He was born on March 22, 1911 and was died on January 7, 1996 at the age of 84. He started his education when the Philippines was already an American colony and the medium of instruction back then was in English. At an early age, he learned 3 languages. The first one is the Pampango from his mother, and the second one was English from his teacher at school, and the third one was Tagalog from the Tondo slums. He went to America as an aficionado or the what's called scholar of the Philippine Commonwealth government in 1941. At the age of 30, he took his master's program in English at the University of Illinois. The central theme of his works is exile due to his experience as an exile in America when the war broke out in the Philippines. So in 1942, he studied at the Columbia University with the founder of the Story magazine, the person who published his first fiction in America. He returned to the Philippines after the war. His first works were Bella Magdalena and The Volcano. He won the Philippine Republic Cultural Heritage Award for Literature in 1965. So we will now proceed to the summary of the story entitled The Day the Dancers Came by Bienvenido and Santos. So you need to pay attention because I will read the summary of the story. The story, The Day the Dancers Came, revolves around the 2 friends named Phil and Tony. So Phil and Tony were both old Filipino men living in Chicago ever since World War II ended. Phil described himself as an old, ugly man and described Tony as a good-looking gentleman that looked younger than he really was. The story was basically about how a group of Filipino dancers were arriving in Chicago that day. And Phil thought that it would be an excellent idea if he took the dancers around the city, showed them the sights, and invite them to his place for some adobo and chicken relleno. For the first part of the story, Phil constantly talked about the dancers with his friend and roommate, Tony. Phil and Tony have been friends pretty much ever since they moved to the US. And the entire time, Tony had been suffering from a disease that frustrated many doctors in which caused gradual peeling all over his body. When Tony left for the doctor, Phil left a little later to meet the dancers at the hotel. When he got there and saw all the dancers, he completely forgot what he wanted to say and lost all train of thought. When he finally managed to gather up all the confidence he had left to invite them to his house, they would just move away and say, "No thanks, we're too busy." Later that night, he ended up going to the show alone with Tony since Tony hadn't yet returned from the doctor. Despite of the disappointment he had earlier that day, Phil contemplated that if he would just record the show on his tape recorder, he would have the sounds with him to help him remember the dancers, the show, and bring back past memories. When he got home, he noticed that Tony was back. Tony commented that the dancers weren't with him and that he knew they were never would have come home him in the first place. Phil started to listen to his tape recorder and his failure from earlier that day no longer mattered to him because his recording had brought him a certain feeling that it just filled him with different memories and emotions. While he listened, Tony was yelling from the room, telling him to shut his recorder off. When he asked Tony what the doctor had to say, Tony wouldn't answer. Tony asked what the dancers were like, and Phil told him that they were beautiful, young, and graceful. He heard Tony let out a sigh, and as he looked down to the tape recorder he held in his hands, he noticed that the spools were spinning, and he finally realized that he had pressed erase. When he tried to play it back, there was nothing except for a scream part of the finale with drums and tolling of the bell. When he looked outside, it was already morning. That was the end of the story.
So we will now proceed to the characters and the characterization. The first one is Phil. He lives with a fellow Filipino named Tony in an apartment in Chicago. And next is Tony, the friend of Phil, a few years older than him. He is suffering from a kind of wasting disease. And lastly is the group of dancers from the Philippines, the one who rejected Phil from his invitation. And now let's proceed to the point of view, the third person limited omniscient, as it focuses on Phil and his thoughts. Next is the setting of the story in Chicago, early November during the snow season, in Phil and Tony's apartment, where Phil wanted to invite the dancers for the Chicken Relleno, and in New York, one of the place where the dancers performed, and lastly the theater where the dancers performed. And now let's have the theme. The first one is the cultural identity and a sense of belongingness, as Phil feels like he does not belong to the American or with the Americans despite obtaining the citizenship and been living there for so long, and the sense of connection. He lost also the sense of connection from the Filipinos as he's been away for quite so long. And next is the time in memory, as Phil is afraid of not having enough time, getting old and forgetting all his memories, which is why he used the magic sound recorder to help him remember the things. And the day the dancers came, Phil's experience epitomizes the Filipino-American struggle with loneliness and alienation. He seeks comradeship and comfort from his fellow countrymen and American friends. He's turned between his new life in America, the land of dreams, and the nostalgia for his old life in the Philippines. Having been in the US for quite some time, he got so excited when he heard the news that a troupe of Filipino dancers is in town for a show. And then later on, Phil felt the pangs of truth. His illusions of being reunited to his native land is broken. He lost his game against fate. For Phil, time was a villain. In the beginning, the words he often heard were too young. Too young, but all of a sudden, too young became too old, too late. What had happened in between? A weariness, a mist covering all things. You don't have to look at your face in a mirror to know that you're old, suddenly old, grown useless for a lot of things, and too late for all the dreams you have wrapped up well against the day of need. Like time, memory was often a villain, a betrayer. And that would be all. Thank you.